Have you ever heard someone say, "That never happened. You're imagining things. You are overreacting. It wasn't that bad"? That's not just conflict. That is gaslighting. It's an emotional abuse that makes you question your memory, your feelings, and even your sanity. In today's episode, we're exposing some of the most damaging manipulation tactics: gaslighting, blame shifting, and minimizing. These are the conversations that leave you spinning, fused, apologizing, and wondering if the problem is you. But here's the truth. God is not the author of confusion. 1 Corinthians 33. He is the God of truth, clarity, and peace. You deserve to feel safe in your relationships, and today we're going to help you recognize the signs, reclaim your voice, and walk in freedom.
Have you ever felt like something was off, but you couldn't explain it? Like the person you love is slowly chipping away at who you are?
Or maybe you're starting to question everything: your feelings, your memory, your worth.
We've both lived that story.
Different marriages, same man, same toxic pattern.
Deception, spiritual manipulation, sexual addiction, financial abuse, it nearly broke us.
But even in our darkest moments, God was still working, holding space for the healing that we couldn't yet see.
I'm Lizzie.
And I'm Deana. We are the voices behind Surviving Toxic Relationships, a podcast and YouTube space created for women walking through the fire or rising from the ashes.
We're not therapists. We're survivors, mothers, grandmothers, and women of faith who refuse to stay silent.
So whether you're stuck, freshly out, or years into your healing, we are here with real stories, honest tools, and no sugarcoating.
You don't have to heal alone.
And you're not crazy. It was just that he was that convincing.
There is hope. There is healing.
And no matter what you've been through, you are deeply seen and deeply loved.
Welcome back to Surviving Toxic Relationships. I'm Lizzie, and with me is Deana. We are going to go ahead and continue our conversation that we started on our last podcast about manipulation and how to spot them in our conversations with other people. It could be people at work, it could be our friendships, it could be family members. It's not just our domestic partners when it deals with conversations. Well, let's kind of recap some of the things that we discussed in our previous podcast. We talked about some of the subtle signs of manipulation tactics. Well, today we're diving into direct and emotionally abusive tactics. One of them is being gaslit, or gaslighting, so to speak, is what we call it. And it's one that a lot of people will say, but do we really understand that there's different ways that we could be gaslit and not even see it? Then you can start to notice them in our different conversations. Some of the scriptures that we talked about was that God is not the author of confusion. Well, right now I want to say John 8:32, then you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. And a lot of times it means that we need to be more discerning when we are in our conversations and in our daily lives so that we can recognize these red flags. So your first question is, what is gaslighting? Well, it's a manipulative tactic when someone makes you doubt your memory, perception, or sanity. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and thought, what? That was the most confusing conversation ever? And they walked away thinking they got us believing something, and we walked away more confused than when we started the conversation. It's almost like it kind of plays out in relationships of rewriting our history, denying the evidence. You could even have a video, and somehow in their explanation of it, they're denying it. And some of them are so good at it that you question, you're going, oh, well, maybe this video didn't really happen. Also, what about blame shifting and emotional invalidation? As we move forward, we will go ahead and kind of break down 3 of these very toxic manipulative strategies.
So scenario 1 that we're going to talk about, again, is gaslighting. And gaslighting is almost that idea that never happened, you're imagining things, you're crazy, you don't hear things right, those types of things. So I have a really good example of gaslighting that ended up causing one of my very good friends to leave their position. And it was because one of my great friends had a boss, and this boss did something that I want to call reverse gaslighting. That's not really a phrase, but it just makes me feel like this fits in this scenario. So this person, my friend, was a fantastic manager, had been in the managerial field in healthcare for decades. And he went into his boss and was new in the company. And he and I ended up becoming friends because we were both managers. And he would sit in front of his boss and she would give him directions, just like bosses do, on what to do and how to carry out the next task. He would come back to her and she would say something like, I told you that you were the one that was supposed to return that report to the CFO. You were the one that was supposed to turn that in. And he would just be baffled. He would say, I do not remember you ever telling me that I was supposed to turn in a report to the CFO by next Tuesday. And she'd say, yeah, you were going to take that on. I had too much going on and you were going to take that on. You said you would do it. He had no recollection. And then he would go in another time and she would say, you were supposed to do this by next Friday. This was a task you were supposed to do. This was really important. The upper leaders are asking why you didn't get this done. And he would say, when did you tell me to do that? And of course, now he's freaking out because she's on the verge of writing him up. And she would say, well, remember, we had that conversation when you were in my office. And he would just be baffled. And again, this happened again and again to where she would start writing him up. Now, remember this person had been in many other companies and had never been written up, not once in his entire life. All of a sudden, he's being written up multiple times for things that he never, ever remembered that happened. And he's questioning his sanity. He's questioning his memory. He's questioning his mental health. He's saying there's got to be something wrong with this. But she insisted that they had the conversation. Finally, he realized that he was being gaslit. And I call it reverse gaslighting because gaslighting itself is generally when you ask somebody, maybe a significant other or somebody in your life, you talk to them about a behavior, you talk to them about something they've done, you've talked to them about something that bothers you, and they act like it never happened, or they act like you're exaggerating it, or they act like nobody thought that was bad but you. But this one was the other person saying, I told you this, I gave you this task, I gave you these things to do. What finally drove it home for him was he realized that she was trying to fire him because she wrote him up time and time again for these invisible tasks. And here's the thing, never once were these put in an email. Never once were these communicated in writing. It was always these meetings that she would have with all of her leaders. So that's a tip right there. If you ever are in a relationship or you have a boss that does a lot of verbal instructions, verbal next steps, make sure that you send them an email and say, can you please just remind me of what we talked about in our meeting and everything you expect me to do? If they don't respond to you, that's a red flag. But this is gaslighting, and it also can be categorized under the rewriting history because history suddenly doesn't look the same anymore. Now, I will tell you that once this friend of mine, was on final written warning, he just went ahead and left the company because he saw the handwriting on the wall that there was no way he could defend himself in this, which is a real shame because the company really benefited by him being there. He was fantastic to the patients and to all the employees. Such a sad thing. So this is a clear example of gaslighting. Someone denies or distorts reality to make you question your memory, your perception, and of course your sanity. So it works for the manipulator because it creates self-doubt. If somebody hears you said this, you didn't do that, you're imagining things, they start to believe it. So make sure you affirm your experience. I know what I saw, or I know what you said, or I know what you didn't say. And again, if you're in a boss situation, make sure everything that they give you as a task comes out in writing, including deadlines, dates, and specifics of the task. Avoid debating your memory. The goal of gaslighting is to confuse you, not to find a resolution. And then seek a safe support. Talk to someone you trust who can help you stay grounded in the truth.
Those are good. So let's go ahead and go into our second manipulation tactic, blame shifting. So this reminds me of the time when Rex and I were in the separation process when I had left. And for those of you that may not know this, because we know that sometimes people listen and they don't realize Deana and I were both married to the same person. She was wife number 1. I was wife number 2. So when I separated, it was kind of interesting because he got to the point where he was telling everybody that I went through $100,000 of his money. And I didn't hear the reasons, Deana, but I know that he told your kids when, he was confronted, and then he explained it, but I can't remember exactly what that was.
Yeah, so it's pretty hilarious. When they were going through their divorce and she had left because she finally couldn't take his treatment of her anymore, he went around telling, the kids who were my kids and her stepkids, he went around telling them that she, all these negative things about her, but then also that she went through $100,000 of his money, trying to justify the reason why she would have to leave. Well, the reason why he was not, anyway, it doesn't matter. He was just trying to justify his behavior. Yeah. And so finally, my son confronted him and said, "You've never had $100,000. You don't even have $1,000 in your savings account and probably never have. How did Lizzie run through $100,000 of money you don't have?" And so he hemmed and hawed and got a little, backed in a corner. And then he said, "Well, because we moved several times while we were married and she decided she didn't want to move anymore because it was just hard on the family. So because she wasn't constantly moving, that brought my retirement amount down more than what it should have been. Because if I just kept moving constantly, then I could make more money at each place and maybe it would boost my retirement up." So he had manufactured this whole scenario about the fact that she wanted to stay grounded to make and keep her family settled and safe, that somehow that cost him more in his future retirement down the road. And he came up with $100,000 and now she stole it from him, which ironically and hilariously, this is how gaslighting works. He drained all of her retirement. She ended up having zero when she walked away. And guess what? He walked away from my 27-year marriage with him and her 6-year marriage to him, and he had all of his retirement. So to literally twist the details of this to where both she and I walked out penniless and he walked out with all of his retirement intact and yet twisted that whole story is exactly the perfect example of gaslighting and blame shifting.
Yes, that still baffles my mind, but some of the things that kind of help us in those types of situations is staying calm and separate. And so I think that kind of makes me chuckle because when I first heard this through Deana, I actually laughed. I didn't have to stay calm because it was so ludicrous in this particular scenario. But sometimes it's not going to be like that, right? Especially when we're raw and it could trigger different types of emotions. So just remember, stay calm and separate responsibility from your reaction. And also use clear, non-defensive boundaries. Like, your feelings are valid, but your behavior is still your responsibility. How did you give me $100,000? I mean, come on. That one's an easy answer. I never had it.
No.
Okay, so kind of going back now, we're going to go into scenario number 3 because it kind of blends right in because we're going to talk about the same person, Rex, our ex. It wasn't that bad. So here's what he had done. He had been building a separate life from me while he was still married and living with me. And we call her Jane. And I found out about her when I knew that I was divorcing him because I knew there was somebody else. I just didn't know anything else and I couldn't put my finger on it. And so 5 days after the divorce, I went into the house to collect the rest of my belongings that were written out in my divorce. Found her letters, everything else. Then Deana and I went on a campaign for probably almost 3 months to look for her, to let her know. So just giving you a little backstory for those that don't know. Anyway, through Deana's message on Facebook, she was able to communicate with Jane and come to find out she had no idea he lived a separate life. She had no idea I even existed. And on top of that, she had even done a background check on him. And I did not show up on the background check, even 6 years later after the marriage. So with all that to say is within a few days, she had his stuff packed up. trip. He didn't know it. He came home from a trip and she had a restraining order. She had an annulment. She was, I'm not even going to mess with this. And his response before pulling out of his packed car of the driveway, because there was police there too, he said, "You didn't even hear my side of the story." Okay, well, first of all, how do you have your side of the story when there's so much evidence packed against it, right? So what was that? He was trying to minimize his own tactics, just that what he did was not that big of a deal. And then to top it off, as he was minimizing my feelings or my situation in this, he sent out a mass text to his children, Deana, Jane, and his sisters, about how much he had loved Deana, and Deana was his first love. And then he said, "Lizzie is such a good person, but I never loved her like I loved Deana. But Jane, she revised my love," pretty much is what he was saying. So again, he minimized his tactic. He thought, "Oh, what I did was no big deal." No, you destroyed, I don't want to say destroyed, but you broke 2 families, 3 if you included his own children and his own first wife. And then he minimized who I was in his life for 6 years. That is an awful tactic for anybody to use, and it's a hard one for anybody to go through. So why this is harmful for anybody is the fact that it minimizing erodes emotional safety. It tells a survivor their feelings are too much, not real, or inconvenient, which is kind of what I went through. It's exactly what I went through. And on the same time, over time, it trains them to stop speaking up, meaning people like me. But it didn't, because here I am on a podcast sharing my story. Another way to probably be healthy is to affirm your right to your own emotional experience. And I feel like every time we tell this story, Deana, I feel like that's what I'm doing, because he gaslighted the whole situation, blame shifted, and then he minimized what he did to me or to anybody else. Like it was no big deal. Like what he did was normal.
He minimized what he did to all 3 of us, because
Yes.
the idea was, I was married to this person, then I married the second person, but I just never got over the first person because I was in so much pain. And so I had to fall in love with a third person in order to, it was like absolutely ridiculous, but you're right. It was trying to create this romantic love story around something that was horrible and extremely painful for all 3 of us ladies and all of our kids and all of our families. Like the third lady, Jane, he created a whole family with her for almost a year while he was married to Lizzie. That's not a romantic love story. That's devastating. So yeah, these people are so good at taking something that is horrible and disgusting and trying to make it sound righteous or needed or necessary.
Yeah. Well said.
So Lizzie, which of these red flag cues was the hardest for you to recognize in your past relationship?
Well, when I think of Rex, he, at the end, anytime I tried to confront anything or how I was feeling, how I was hurting, because he would go away on Sundays saying he was going to spend time with a coworker to pray and to work on our marriage. But I'd be like, how come I haven't met this person? Or anytime I'd confront him, he would start crying. He would just start crying and talking about how I hurt him. I loved you so much, kind of thing. And then he would cry. And then all of my energy, because I was so raw, I reverted to the fact that I was going, oh, he's really hurting, instead of really looking at the person that was hurting, the person that was the victim of the circumstances. I was then turning to comfort him. Well, obviously now I look at it and I'm like, that was a serious manipulation tactic that I did not see in the past, because I think as a Christian, we're really sensitive to people that are crying. Now I'm like, we really need to recognize the true tears of grief or shame to tears of manipulation, and to get control of this conversation, because they do not want to be called out on their behavior. That was the hardest for me.
100%. And boy, I tell you, 27 years of that, it seemed like every time it was time to confront him, time to draw a boundary, he would just start crying and either saying that he was a horrible person, or saying that he was a horrible father, or that he just didn't know what was wrong with him. He was just so destitute. I finally got the epiphany that he only started crying and was devastated over his actions when he got caught. There was never a time he would come to me in 27 years and say, I just did something. I feel horrible. My heart is breaking right now. Never. It was always when there was a boundary drawn and something was caught and brought to the light, that this whole crying thing.
Remember, if you're listening to this, you're like, oh, I'd have read right through it. Remember, when you're in it and you're the person in these relationships, your heart is so tangled up with so much emotion because there's still a part of you that loves them and you still have some good memories and you're always fighting for those good memories, thinking you can get more of that. And sometimes you're just really shocked by the person's behavior and the choice patterns they make. And it just becomes very convoluted, which causes more brain fog. So, Deana, now looking at everything that you and I both have gone through, which red flag do you spot quickly in conversations now that you would have missed before?
Oh my goodness. I can't believe how many I missed in that relationship. But now, when you are talking to somebody and having a heart to heart with them, even if you're not having a heart to heart, this applies. If you are talking to somebody and let's say you confronted them on an issue, let's say you are having a heart to heart with them. Let's say you need to get something off your chest. You need to be heard. You have an issue that you need to talk about. And they flip the scenario back to themselves to where now they become the focus. They have the problem. They need the attention. They need the understanding. They need to be seen. And you never even got heard. And that, again, applies not even in a confrontational setting. That can just apply when you, let's say you go out on a first date with somebody and let's say they don't even seem to want to know a whole lot about you. They just keep talking about themselves. Everything comes back to them. Everything comes back to them. They are like the center of the universe. And that, to me, especially when you are in a confrontational situation where they have done something that you need to talk about and they divert, redirect, sob, cry, and start making it all about them. Do you know how hard my life has been? Do you know why I do these things? Do you have any idea what it's like for me? And it becomes me, me, me. And you know what? You leave that conversation and you never got to experience any kind of resolution, any kind of compassion, any kind of caring or love. You have to keep feeding it back to them. They are just starving for everything you have to give them and make them and prop them up and make them feel better. Like they slap you across the face and then they cry because it hurt them so bad. And that do you ever had any idea why I did that? And it was so hard for me. And you're sitting there and your face is burning and your face is stinging and you feel so in pain and in shock. And they are literally crying and making you hug them to make them feel better for slapping you. That's how it feels.
I love that. That was perfect, Deana. And just remember, God sees, God hears, and He affirms your truth, even in the midst of all this ick and confusion. What does healthy communication feel like in your body compared to manipulation? This was something we did cover in our previous podcast when we did our part 1 of how to spot manipulation in conversations, but they are so worth bringing it up again in case you didn't hear it because you did not listen to that particular episode. But the first thing, if you're in a conversation, do a quick body scan. Am I tense during the conversation, rushing, or confused? Manipulation often triggers stress responses. Another thing you can do is a quick reality check. Would I give the same answer if I slept on it or asked a friend? And then finally, the third one is a motivation mirror. Do I feel free and safe to say no without any fear of backlash? If not, coercion may be at play in your conversation.
And here's some tips for recovery for you. Keep a journal. Dates, quotes, actions, just so there's no questioning your memory. Number 2, validate yourself with scripture and make sure you have a safe community that you can talk to, someone that isn't talking to your abuser. And lastly, seek coaching, counseling, or support groups. This is such a confusing time, and you're going to need all the mental clarity that you can get and all the support so that you can stay on top of what's going on without being in the middle of the fog.
Well said. So as we close today's episode, we want to remind you, confusion is not from God. Gaslighting, blame shifting, minimizing, these are not just toxic behaviors. They are tools of manipulation meant to distort your reality and silence your voice. But your voice matters, your feelings are valid, and your story deserves truth.
If today's episode brought clarity or conviction, Don't push it aside. Sit with it. Ask the Holy Spirit to reveal any relationships or patterns that may need healing or boundaries. Take a moment this week to check in with yourself. Am I being respected? Am I allowed to speak and feel freely? Does this relationship bring me peace or confusion? And remember the promise from John 8:32. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. You were not created to walk in fear, silence, or shame. You were created to walk in truth, freedom, and peace. You're not alone. Healing is possible, and we're walking it with you.
We would like to encourage you to submit a scenario for a future was that manipulation or miscommunication segment. And we would love to hear your voice, your thoughts, so we can incorporate that into this segment. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful day.